All right, it is 12:05, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining Within's first webinar of the year. And I'm personally very excited because this is my first time hosting a webinar. So thank you all for joining. So what are we here to talk about today? You got the title up there on your screen. And obviously, about 2 years ago, our world got turned upside down when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and so many things changed. And one of the big ones was consumer spending habits. So we're going to get into that in the rest of today's webinar. But before we do, I'd love to introduce two guests who will be joining us, my wonderful colleagues. So hi, first, I'm Arib. I'm a director in the digital media department here at Within. So first up, we have Tyler Horner, also a director of digital media. He's here to help talk through some of the data. He's been at Within for about 5 years, and he helped launch our Marketing Pulse data dashboard. Tyler, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great introduction. Pretty much covers it all. But yeah, I love really diving deep into the data. So very excited to also bring this to life in a way that'll help marketers with really actionable tips. But yeah, excited to be here.
Yes, it's all about action. We also have Tommy, who is our head of lifecycle, here to provide the retention perspective. He has over a decade of experience in retention at brands like Sephora. So Tommy, do you want to say hi?
Thanks. Yeah. Hi. Nice to be here and present to all of you. Talk about how to really drive more revenue, better promotions, and just be more surgical in our approach to the consumer.
Good catch on the not nice to meet you, but nice to be here. All right, let's get into things. Before we do, though, we have a question for you, the audience. So the question is, how much of your end of year shopping did you do on the day of Black Friday itself last year? So you should have seen a poll pop up on your screen just now. We'll give everyone just about 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds to answer.
Wait, Ray, this isn't fair. I can't vote.
I know, I can't either. I mean, we can't skew the results, so. Yeah, and remember, it's how much of your end of year shopping on the day of Black Friday itself. Cool, I'm gonna assume that most people have done that. So we're gonna get back to that later. So keep that in mind. But for now, so we talked about the title, Spreading the Wealth. What do we mean by spreading the wealth? What we're talking about today is the fact that when consumers buy is changing. And it's not just for Black Friday, but it is actually across the whole year. So what does that mean for people like us and for the brands that we work for? That means we got to plan differently, right? But how? What does that mean? Like plan differently? How? What do we have to do? What changes do we have to make? Tyler, can you tell us like what we can expect, what our audience can expect to take away from this webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to break this into 3 primary categories that we're going to cover today, and we'll have data to support this. But what this really all starts with is revenue forecasting, right? We need to be understanding the ebbs and flows of consumer demand and how that's going to actually impact our business's seasonality, right? And where that carries into is promotion planning, right? If we understand when there is going to be demand in market, then that should affect when we're promoting, right? We need to know when we can capture a user's attention, when the time is right to launch that promotion. Finally, budget planning, which ties into the other 2, is how should we be planning when to allocate our budget? For budget planning, we need to combine not just the demand side and the consideration of when our promos are going to be, but also we have to consider, okay, what are the auction costs at every time of the year? How long does it take our media to make an impact, right? And so the analysis we're going to go through today is going to tie into all 3 of these.
Cool, and we hope to give you specific action items on each of these that we'll get to at the end. So I know marketing, especially digital, is ever changing, but in the past, it's been easier. Okay, maybe not easy, but it has been relatively easy compared to going through all the changes that we have now and not knowing what the heck is going on, because we had in the past the same trends every year, or at least similar trends. So it was relatively easy to plan. Okay, just look at last year. What was our Black Friday, Cyber Monday like last year? Let's plan for the same. Obviously, there are going to be some variations and adjustments, but on the whole, it's going to be similar. So for example, here we have a classic revenue curve. So you have your big holidays where you see your spikes. You got your Memorial Day, your Labor Day, your Black Friday, Cyber Monday, your Christmas and New Year, your classic. Now, this isn't real data, but it is a classic revenue curve that you might expect. Obviously, again, there would be variations, but for the most part, stay the same. So let's talk for a second about how those three things that Tyler just mentioned, how marketers dealt with those in the past when we had that classic revenue curve and we knew roughly what the trends were going to be. So Tommy, can you tell us a little bit more about how they were done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like how Apple rolled out their products years ago. They kept upgrading the iPod, getting more memory, getting a color screen. It was never really groundbreaking or truly new. You just looked at last year and saw areas of improvement, places where the order curve was softer or where revenue didn't hit its target. And then you developed expanded tactics, not necessarily new, to hit those goals. You might be able to launch SMS, or maybe you expand into your owned channel program, or maybe you figure out some new paid tactics. But it wasn't really groundbreaking or outside of the box. And the same goes for promotion planning. You didn't really give the customer anything to work with until the end of the year, when, hence the name Black Friday, you were trying to get back into the black because you were in the red all year. And so I think what suffered the most was the relationship with the customer and not continuing a conversation with them throughout the year.
For the longest time, I did not know that's where Black Friday came from, but I do now. Before this webinar, don't worry. Okay, cool. So yeah, that was how it was done in the past. I think we're all familiar with that, but we're here today to talk about the future. We're here to arm you with the predictions for what's going to happen throughout the rest of 2022. So let's get to it. What is our new normal? So if this was our classic revenue curve, might we just see this year, slight variations on our classic revenue curve, the previous normal? Or, might we see something a little different where there's just like an evening out of daily revenue across the year? Or might we see something completely different where we see more random or unexpected peaks and troughs in revenue? So how do we even try to understand what our new normal is? So if we are going to understand that, what is the data that we should be looking at? Tyler, can you tell us what the data set is?
Yeah, and to really answer this question, the first thing we wanted to look at what is the variation in revenue we're seeing for our clients? How have those peaks and troughs changed, right? Are we seeing more or less volatility in revenue? And that's really where we started. And so we're gonna do a little stats review. Promise this isn't stats 101 again, but we're gonna talk about a metric called standard deviation. And a lot of our data that we're gonna walk through today centers around this. Promise. Not super complicated. It really just represents variation in a data set. So Ravi, if you want to pull up this visual, this really explains it well, which is we're going to see with any data set, and in this case, we're talking about revenue for a business. We're going to see generally in most cases, your revenue mostly varies around your average, right? Most days are average. And then we have very high peak days and then very low trough days that vary around that peak. What standard deviation says is if we have a higher standard deviation, it means more variation in the data set, that there are higher peaks or lower troughs. The lower your standard deviation, the more that your revenue should generally revolve around your average.
Got it. Okay. So higher standard deviation, more variation. Lower standard deviation, it's all much more similar and there's less variation.
Exactly. So comparing it to the weather, we would say if we have low standard deviation, we're having mostly fair weather days. But as we all know, we're going through climate change. We're seeing more and more volatility in the weather, right? We're in February in New York, it's 61 degrees, which is normal. So we're seeing increasing volatility. We have increasing standard deviation in temperature due to global warming.
Got it. Okay. That is a helpful example. Okay, so we're looking at standard deviation. We understand why we're looking at it because we're trying to understand the spread of the revenue or the variation of the revenue. So, what has the data been telling us about the trend in standard deviation?
Yeah, and we're going to walk through data here for one of our median clients, which tells us a very interesting story, which is that we are seeing much higher volatility. So we're going to walk through standard deviation in daily revenue, again, for the median client, which is averaging a little over $200,000 in daily revenue. And for what we're seeing is that deviation in daily revenue has decreased by almost half since 2020. It was even higher in 2019. So while growth is continuing to increase for these brands, we're seeing, again, more and more level numbers. So where in the past, that brand that was making about $200,000 in revenue, they would see most of their, on about 2/3 of their days, revenue between 100,000 and 300,000. Now on about 2/3 of days, they're going to see revenue between 150,000 and 250,000. So again, more fair weather days, less extremes.
Okay, so just to clarify, the numbers on the screen right now, they're all going down 95, 70, 54. So, but you're saying this does not mean that the business as a whole, the revenue that's bringing in is going down. It just means that the daily revenues have less difference between them, but the business as a whole can and is still growing. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what we're seeing across our database. A good thing to liken it to, and I'll bring us back to a climate example, is think about rising tide levels, right? We're seeing if revenue is the ocean, we're seeing that tide levels are continuing to rise, but in this case, we're getting fewer and fewer big waves, right? We're seeing generally a more level, steady rise, whereas in the past you would see suddenly huge waves. In that case, I guess a little bit the opposite of what we're seeing with climate change.
Got it. Okay. So I think that makes sense to me, but like explain it a different way. Like give me an example.
Yeah, I think really a better way to relate this is the amount of peak revenue days that the average brand is seeing. And so
sorry, what's a peak revenue day?
Yeah, so a peak revenue day, we're going to define that as a day where a brand sees beyond their one standard deviation in daily revenue. And so this should occur generally like fairly rarely, right? One standard deviation these days should occur less than 30% of the time. And so we took one standard deviation, one standard deviation in 2019 as our baseline for a brand. And then we looked at how many days they saw that were that big in the years following. And so even with revenue growth and even with these brands growing and having generally higher daily revenue, we saw that the median peak day, again, coming back to even 2019 when these brands were smaller, their 30% highest days, now they're seeing those days less than half as frequently. So a day that would have been a once every week is now a day you only get once every 2 weeks. Maybe in your case, you promo more on a more like quarterly basis. One big week every 2 months is now more like one big week every quarter, every 4 months.
Got it. Okay. And sorry, just to clarify, what is this 2022 number? How do we have that already?
Yeah, and so this is taking the data we have so far and projecting it out over the course of the year. And so we are continuing to see a trend, even comparing just the January and the early part of February in 2021 to 2022, we're seeing, again, fewer and fewer peak days within that period. And so we just projected that trend out for the rest of the year.
Got it. So even though obviously we don't have a lot of 2022 behind us, we're seeing the trend is still continuing even with the amount of data that we do have.
100%.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, let's talk specific. Like how might this actually work for a particular brand? Like I understand the peak revenue days are coming down. What's happening to that brand standard deviation?
Yeah, and if I lost anybody, this would hopefully make it a lot more relatable with an example of a specific brand in our database, which is this is an omni-channel apparel brand. So they're in stores, mostly online revenue, but in the apparel space. And we're going to walk through their revenue over the last 3 years and that one standard deviation revenue range. So starting in 2020, this brand was seeing an average revenue throughout the year of 223,000, and that one standard deviation was 78,000. So on roughly 2/3 of days, roughly 70% of days, revenue would be within plus or minus 78,000. over the last 2 years, revenue has increased for this brand. So in 2021, average revenue jumped up to 241,000. In 2022, that revenue jumped up to 289,000. So they're seeing continued growth, but that standard deviation is actually shrinking. So from 2020 to 2021, dropped from 78,000 to 48,000, and then 41,000 in 2022. So again, we're seeing, coming back to the ocean example, we're seeing that the overall tide is rising. We're seeing more and more daily revenue, but we're seeing fewer and fewer big waves.
Okay, cool.
Decrease from 78 to 41.
Yeah, so this is pretty much like exactly what I was asking before about how the standard deviation is changing in relation just like the overall revenue. So this very clearly says that the overall revenue is going up from 223 to 289. The standard deviation is almost halved from 78 to 41.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So I understand that the standard deviation is decreasing. The daily revenue is spreading out some more, so there aren't as many peaks and troughs. So I guess my next, and most people's next obvious question would be why? Why is this happening?
Yeah, and that's really the question we're here to answer, right? And the most pressing thing. And so while it's really hard to say to define a specific causal factor, right, to nail it all down on one thing, what we are seeing is a very high correlation with this trend and the onset of the pandemic. And so from there, as marketers, we have to think, okay, well, it wasn't the pandemic itself necessarily, but how did consumers' behavior change during the pandemic? And there's really two big areas where behavior changed, which is one, less in-store shopping, right? For a long time, it wasn't even possible, right? So these brick and mortar moments didn't exist in the same way they did in the past. Two, people were working from home. So gone was the time when you were only doing your shopping after work hours or on weekends. We've transitioned to this world where shopping is 24/7. People are always looking at their phones. People are buying during the workday. They maybe were doing that before, but they're doing it more frequently.
It definitely
were. Don't tell Joe, but I've done this myself, and sometimes these days people will even go shop in store in the middle of the workday, right? Which is just something that didn't happen before.
Yeah, so this makes sense to me. And the question I was going to ask was, but e-com has been around for a while. So why are you saying this is happening now? But I understand what you're saying, that people are at home, they're shopping. It's more of just like a 24/7 shopping cycle. They don't have a boss breathing down their neck. And so they just are shopping more constantly, consistently. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're shopping more consistently. What does that mean for the brands and the marketers, the ones who are in this room?
Yeah, and so whenever consumers change their behavior, brands have to change their behavior, right? And so as brands have seen that consumers are shopping spontaneously or really just shopping whenever, and that they're responding better to promos throughout the year, they're not necessarily waiting for that brick and mortar moment, right? They don't need to be cued by that brick and mortar, that tentpole moment, like a President's Day, like a Memorial Day, or oh, we lost our Abe. Oh no. Hopefully we can get Ray back online and that he's okay. He's at the office and we tend to have blips in Wi-Fi, so I hope that's all it was. But Tommy, we can keep the conversation going.
So sorry for that. We can do all the prep in the world, and one thing will still go wrong, which was my laptop battery dying.
Oh, tough.
God, yeah. All right. I will get us back on track very shortly. But in the meantime, why don't, okay, so.
Anyway, we paused just talking about how brands were responding to consumers changing their behavior. And so I was, as you're pulling it up, I'll kind of just continue, which is really brands had to respond to consumers changing in habits. And what we saw is that brands are promoting earlier and earlier. And regardless of your vertical, you've likely seen this from competitors. A few years ago, even before the pandemic, we saw that some brands were starting to promo, not just waiting until Black Friday, but starting to promo maybe a few days before Black Friday. But now it's really like Black Friday is the whole month, right? And Amazon is even launching some of their deals in October. So the promo period is just moving earlier and earlier. And that's really the way that brands have responded.
While we're waiting for it to come up, we could go over some of the questions that have been asked. They're pretty good.
Yeah, maybe we can pull it up. I'm gonna Rabe, let me know if you need our help in sharing, since I know you're just on laptop now. Cool. Tommy, do you want to? So I'm pulling these up. Tommy, do you want to?
Sure.
Answer one of them?
So Chris asked, are brands running promos more often and for longer periods? Is that affecting standard deviation, and should brands consider longer promo periods? I don't want to speak for Tyler's standard deviation bit, but I can say that there's a lot of juice to squeeze out of running smarter promotions. I have experience at a beauty company where we were typically running an 11-day promo, and that sounded great, but when you dug a little deeper, you realized that we were running 11-day promos because that's what the distribution center asked for. So they would have 2 weekends to fulfill orders. So our marketing strategy was being dictated by a supply chain constraint. Not necessarily the best way to go. And so we looked into what was driving the most incremental revenue, not just revenue, and found that we could actually run 2 promotions within an 11-day window, 3 days during the week and 3 days over the weekend, and drive as much, if not more, incremental revenue than an 11-day promo, and appear fewer days on promo, which makes our brands happy and brings in more money.
Also, Matt asked the question, which is this decline in the regularity and severity of revenue spikes across all verticals? Would it still apply to companies that have more consistent conversions, pet food, human oral care, et cetera? Perfect question. It's actually the perfect lead into our next slide, where we're going to talk through it. So, Arabe, if you're close to getting us back into the deck, I'll just wait and answer this question in line with the next slide. Otherwise, I'll address it now.
I would just answer it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer. So we're going to show this data. You're going to see it in a second, but it definitely is applying less to certain verticals. And the one that, like what you're kind of describing here, we call essentials, and we have an example of a brand in that falls within that vertical that we're going to show next. And they have seen they're like an essentials subscription brand. We try not to be too specific, but yes, they are seeing actually an increase in variation. And the reason, like sort of our rationale for why that's happening is that this is a vertical where there's generally always on promotions, right? They're not tied to Black Friday or specific peak season tentpole moments. They generally have a more consistent promotion. Rabe, glad to have you back as I finish up this answer. But yeah, we'll talk about it more in the next couple slides.
So sorry about that, everyone. I am sharing my screen now. All right.
Battery fully charged, computer plugged in, Rabe?
It's plugged in. I will not be hearing the end of this, but that's okay. We're gonna keep going. Okay. So where did you left off? Let's just wrap up the like how this is the interaction between the brands and the consumers. So it sounds like the first step is that the consumer behavior changes due to some incident, whatever that is. In this case, it was COVID. And then because of that, the marketers react to it by changing the promo strategy. And in this case, expanding the timeline on the promo strategies. And obviously when one brand does it, another brand does it, another brand does it. So it becomes the industry standard. And then once it becomes the industry standard, then we're conditioning the consumers to expect those promos earlier and earlier. Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have this case where consumers, they don't want to wait until that tentpole moment if they know that there's not going to necessarily be a better deal. And in some cases, brands are going to be out of stock, right? So consumers, as soon as they see the promos hit, they're immediately shopping. And so it's just exactly as you said, it's a cyclical effect.
Yeah, and the supply chain issues probably also played a part, at least over the last 6 months or so, right?
100%. Yeah, exactly. And especially it was the case early in the pandemic as well, right?
Yeah. Okay. But okay, so I understand this, but is this always the case, or there are exceptions? Obviously, we have a lot of people in the audience right now from different brands. Does it apply to everyone?
Yeah, and Matt queued us up perfectly here, and I won't rehash too much on this, but we have the data for the brand I was describing earlier here, where this is a brand in the essentials industry. They have sort of a similar to Amazon's their recurring delivery service. They try to get customers to subscribe to certain products, subscribe and save. And Ray, you can go ahead and just pull up in the data for these years. And what we saw is that this brand is seeing a generally steady daily revenue. They have seen slower so far in 2022, but they tend to see more revenue on the back half of the year. But what they're actually seeing is a slight increase in standard deviation. And part of the reason for this is, well, for one, the reason why they haven't seen a decrease in variation, right, is that this vertical, there isn't this cyclical effect. Brands aren't promoting earlier because brands already had an intro customer offer that was relatively consistent throughout the year. They weren't waiting and blasting with a huge discount towards certain parts of the year. And the reason why we might be seeing actually higher variation for this brand is that they're seeing decreasing performance in certain parts of the year, like November, where now it's an always on promotional period, and so they're finding much lighter months then when people aren't necessarily spending the same money in their vertical, and they're starting to actually promote a little heavier and deeper outside of those moments when auction costs are a little lower. So it's sort of the reverse trend where this brand's actually seeing higher volatility.
Got it. Okay. So I guess, do you expect this to apply? It sounds like subscription brands are like one type. Are there any other kinds of verticals or industries that we would expect this to apply to as well?
Yeah, we have a number of clients like this in our database. I would say, yeah, anything like Matt's question raised, anything in kind of the essentials space, just things that don't have, like, if you didn't already have a lot of seasonality, or your vertical wasn't like very promotional around certain times of the year, or if you traditionally for your brand were more steady with your promotion or didn't promote at all.
I was going to say like Allbirds, right?
Exactly. Allbirds is another good example where they're probably seeing this effect happen less because they were a little less seasonal, but yeah.
Got it. Okay. So let's take a quick pause here and take a look at our results from the poll. Mike, why don't you go ahead and put those up? All right. So on the day of Black Friday itself, 47% none at all. Wow, half of you didn't do any shopping on Black Friday.
That's shocking.
Yeah, just a little bit. All right, is like half, and then around, oh wow, some of you really went all in on that one day. But see, definitely no one is living for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. But I think this proves our point, right? Because half the people didn't do any shopping on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, because we don't have these like Black Friday, Cyber Monday blinkers on now. It's just expanded the horizon, and people are seeing these longer time periods where they should shop. And obviously you still, honestly, it's fun to shop on Black Friday itself. So I understand why some of you said that, just a little bit. But overall, it does, even with this audience over here, we're seeing that people are just buying at different times. Okay, so we have that, we understand that. Now to the action items. What can people do? What should they be talking to their team about? What to-do list should they have after this? All right, so let's go into those three categories that we talked about at the start. So the first one is revenue forecasting. It sounds like the easy, straightforward one here is that you should not bank on Black Friday, Cyber Monday as much as you have in the past, or even other major holidays. Beyond that, is there something else that brands can do, Tommy?
Yes, there is an ever-changing landscape of where revenue can come from and the quality of revenue. A lot of that backs into identifying the highest value behavior that is both transactional and non-transactional for a brand, and what combination or series of actions can ultimately lead to the best conversion, right? So an example, you might have an online shopper, you're an omni-channel brand, and you're trying to get them to buy in store because you think that's a great action for them to take and increases LTV. Well, it might not be that simple. You might need them to download the app. You might need them to sign up for your private label credit card. You might need them to join the loyalty program. None of those necessarily are a transaction, but they result in a higher value action taken by the customer than someone that just bought in the store. And then channel cannibalization. Everybody knows that you need like SMS and you need email and you need paid and you need all of the stuff, but are you measuring the incremental value of each touch point, right? So there are always going to be the group of people that need only email. There's going to be a group of people that need email, SMS, and maybe an app push to get them to take that next action. And the trick is identifying who's who and who needs what, so then you can again, sharpen your marketing instrument from more of a bat to a scalpel, if you will.
Got it. Okay. The next category we talked about was promotion planning. This one seems, the most obvious and straightforward, that brands should mirror their promotions to the spreading of consumer demand. But what's the next level? What can brands do to go even deeper or get even further ahead of things?
Yes, it's scary, so bear with me, but the goal is to do away with the site-wide sale, right? Not everybody needs the same kind of incentive to convert with your brand. Maybe it's a new versus repeat customer. Maybe it's a high value versus lower value customer. Maybe it's someone that you are trying to push into a new category that they've never purchased before, or trying to get them to purchase again in a category that they haven't bought in over a year. So the idea behind all of that, if the promotion is more specific and targeted to the highest value action, you end up with one discounted item in the cart, followed by a bunch of full price items. And so your halo, right, your incremental revenue from this targeted promotion is like 85% versus a site-wide promo of 55%. And then kind of what I touched on earlier, while yes, peak days are decreasing, we're not saying that a brand has to be more promotional in order to compensate for that. The trick is, again, to be more targeted and rely on the data and what your customers are telling you, so then you can deliver what they want, when they want, and ultimately save margin.
Got it. So it's essentially like, why give someone a promo if they were going to buy not on promo, but just doing that at a larger scale across the board with all customers at different levels.
Yes, and don't forget to keep a global holdout and a campaign level holdout so you can prove incrementality.
Yes, incrementality, definitely key. Okay, let's get to the last category, budget planning. So again, the obvious one is that brands should plan to spend more in the weeks and months surrounding large holidays, basically not conserve, a giant chunk of their budget for those major holidays. But Tyler, what is something else that they can do?
Yeah, I think another key here is going to be, first of all, this trend is happening, right? It's only going to continue to deepen. So brands should plan to go with the flow a little bit more, go with the grain, and plan your budget a little more proactively. Don't wait until these periods in the past that were your peak demand periods. Move that budget up to when there's going to be lower CPMs. You can get more bang for your buck in your advertising. So that's one key way. Also, if you're doing your, coming back to some of Tommy's tips, is if you're doing your promotions, if you're not waiting to, for a really deep discount when everyone else is promoting, this is even more fruitful as well, right? Because if you're moving your promos and your budget outside of those periods where CPMs are going to be highest, like, you're going to get more bang for your buck, not just in terms of impressions and clicks you'll get for your marketing, but also likely demand, because you're not waiting until people are considering all these different offers or until after they've already bought from your competitors. So that's one. The other thing that ties into this is knowing how long it takes your media spend to make impact, knowing the consideration for your vertical, right? We all know there are certain verticals, cars being one of the most extreme one, right? Where people are going to be considering their purchase over years. But thinking, in the e-commerce world, know your vertical and know how long people are really going to be in market for your product. Know that consideration cycle for certain things like the more essentials side, the low value products. It might be that people have a very low consideration cycle. And in this case, you can't really avoid putting your budget where there's going to be a high demand period. But if you are in a vertical where people are more considered, where your media makes an impact over weeks and months rather than just over the next 24 hours, then consider that when planning your budget.
Yeah, and it sounds like most brands could do this. I mean, some obviously, it'll be a different time frame for everyone, but most brands can. And I love the idea of planning ahead, capitalizing on lower CPMs and CPCs, and then we're getting the benefit of that when the sale actually happens without having to put additional budget behind it. Go ahead, Tommy.
One call out regarding media spend. Let's say you have a really big Facebook campaign and you don't know what message is going to drive the highest ROAS. Test it in email or some other own channel first. Let your existing customers tell you what resonates with them, and then send it out when it costs money.
And email, exactly. Email's free. Yeah. I do think email's probably, the connection between email and paid is probably far underutilized than it could be. Yeah. All right, so this is the suggested to-do list that we have for all of you on this call. We hope that was useful. But before we let you all go, we wanted to ask you what you think the next big thing is. Like, what is the next big change coming to the marketing industry, just like business in general? What is it that we should be thinking about? And what is it that you'd like to see a uninterrupted webinar about next time? So why don't you go to this site and put in some of your thoughts while I will bring that up on screen.
And don't miss us at eTail West or Shop Talk.
By then, Arabe should have a new laptop with
I know. I shouldn't have waited this long. I should have got it. 4 years is too long to have right. the one laptop. All right. Okay, so we have some measurement, Bitcoin, the metaverse. Yeah, I guess I still don't really fully understand what that is. Measurement post iOS 14, that definitely makes sense. And an omni-channel strategy, I guess, in our new world. NFTs are definitely another big one. Okay, yep, we hear you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and apologies again for my little disappearing act in the middle. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed that, but also, took away something that you can actually act on when you exit out of this webinar. So yeah, if you have any thoughts, comments, feedback, please do feel free to reach out. But beyond that, hope you have a great rest of your day and great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.